And I accepted my friend's maid job because I was in love with her. The day I walked into Elena's penthouse apartment wearing a maid's uniform, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the cleaning supplies. Not because I was nervous about the work, I'd done plenty of odd jobs to make ends meet, but because standing there in her gleaming kitchen, watching her try not to look directly at me, I realized I had just made the most reckless decision of my life. I had agreed to become the housemaid for the woman I had been secretly, desperately in love with for 3 years, knowing she had no idea about the feelings that consumed me every time I saw her smile. Elena and I had met in college, back when life felt simpler and dreams seemed within reach. She was studying business while I pursued literature, and somehow our paths crossed in a campus coffee shop where we both reached for the last blueberry muffin. She laughed and insisted I take it, and that laugh, bright and unguarded, planted something deep in my chest that never went away. We became fast friends, the kind who stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, who knew each other's coffee orders and comfort movies. But while our friendship blossomed, something else grew inside me, something I kept buried beneath layers of casual jokes and careful distance. After graduation, our lives diverged in ways I hadn't anticipated. Elena's family business took off, and she inherited a successful marketing firm that transformed her into someone who attended gallery openings and charity galas. Meanwhile, I struggled through a series of unfulfilling jobs, my literature degree feeling more like an expensive piece of paper. With each passing month, we still met for coffee occasionally, but I could feel the gap between our worlds widening. She would talk about her company's expansion while I'd make light of my latest temp position, pretending the distance didn't hurt. What really hurt was watching her date a string of successful men who seemed to fit perfectly into her elevated world, men who could take her to expensive restaurants and weekend getaways, while I counted coins to afford my subway fare. Then came the day she mentioned she was looking for household help. Her career had become so demanding that her apartment, despite its luxury, had fallen into a state of elegant chaos. She needed someone trustworthy, someone she knew, and she was willing to pay generously. The moment she said it, something shifted in my mind. Most people would have seen this as a step backward, accepting a position as a maid for someone who was supposed to be your equal, your friend. But I saw it differently. I saw an opportunity to be close to her, to exist in her space, to be necessary to her daily life in a way I never had been before. My heart overruled every logical protest my brain could muster. The first few weeks were torture dressed up as employment. I would arrive at her apartment early in the morning, letting myself in with the key she'd given me, and I'd move through her private spaces like a ghost. I'd collect the coffee cup she'd left on her nightstand, still stained with her lipstick, and I'd wash it with a tenderness that embarrassed me. I'd fold her clothes, run my fingers over the soft cashmere sweaters and silk blouses, imagining what it would feel like if she ever looked at me the way I looked at her. Sometimes she'd still be home when I arrived, rushing around in her tailored suits, and she'd flash me that same unguarded smile from years ago, thanking me for being there, for making her life easier. She had no idea she was making mine infinitely more complicated. What surprised me was how much I learned about her through the intimate act of caring for her space. I discovered she kept a journal filled with sketches she'd never told me she liked to draw. I found out she listened to old jazz records when she thought no one was around, dancing alone in her living room with a glass of wine. I noticed the prescription bottles for anxiety medication hidden in her bathroom cabinet, a vulnerability she'd never shared with anyone. Through the mundane tasks of cleaning and organizing, I was piecing together a version of Elena that existed beyond the polished exterior she showed the world, and I fell even deeper in love with this hidden, authentic person. But love that lives in silence has a way of becoming toxic, fermenting into something that hurts more than it heals. I started having dreams where I'd confess everything to her, where she'd somehow feel the same way, where the distance between employer and employee, between straight and gay, between possible and impossible would simply dissolve. I'd wake up in my tiny apartment, reality crashing down like cold water, and I'd get ready to go back to her place and pretend everything was fine. The pretending was exhausting. Some mornings I'd stand in her doorway, watching her read emails on her tablet, and I'd have to physically bite my tongue to keep from saying words that could never be unsaid. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when I arrived to find her crying on her bedroom floor, surrounded by crumpled tissues and the remnants of what looked like a difficult phone call. Her perfect composure had shattered, and she looked so small and lost sitting there that every instinct in my body screamed to hold her. I knelt beside her, asking what was wrong, and she looked at me with eyes so full of pain that I felt it in my own chest. She told me her father had been diagnosed with a serious illness, that her company was facing unexpected legal troubles, that she felt like she was drowning under the weight of everyone's expectations. She told me she felt utterly alone, that all the people in her life only saw her success, never her struggle. Without thinking, I took her hand. It was the first time I'd ever initiated physical contact beyond friendly hugs, and I felt electricity shoot through my entire body at the touch. I told her she wasn't alone, that I saw her, really saw her. I told her about the jazz records and the sketches, about how I knew she was more than the polished executive everyone else encountered. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, surprise mixed with something that might have been recognition, and for a moment we just sat there on her bedroom floor, hands clasped, rain hammering against the windows. Time seemed to suspend itself, and I felt the walls I'd built around my feelings beginning to crack. She didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed my hand tighter and said something that changed everything. She told me that the reason she'd asked me to work for her, the reason she'd wanted me around, wasn't really about needing help with her apartment. She admitted she'd been feeling lost, disconnected from anything real, and having me there made her feel grounded in a way she couldn't explain. She said she looked forward to the mornings when she'd find me already there, that coming home to a space I'd touched felt different somehow, warmer. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said she'd been trying to figure out what that meant. Why my presence mattered so much. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. This was the moment where everything could change or everything could end, and I had to decide whether to protect myself or risk complete devastation. I looked at her tear-stained face, at the vulnerability she was offering me, and I realized that loving her in silence had already devastated me. Keeping it hidden hadn't protected me at all. It had just made me a prisoner to my own feelings. So I took a breath that felt like it contained every ounce of courage I possessed, and I told her the truth. I told her I'd taken the job because I was in love with her, that I had been for years, that every morning I spent in her apartment was both bliss and agony because I got to be close to her but never close enough. The silence that followed felt eternal. She didn't let go of my hand, but she didn't speak either. And I prepared myself for the rejection that seemed inevitable. I prepared myself for the loss of not just my unrequited love, but also my friend, my job, my reason for getting up each morning. But then she did something I never expected. She started laughing, not cruel laughter, but the kind that comes from surprise and relief and something breaking open inside you. She told me she'd been trying to understand why she kept dating men who left her feeling empty, why none of her relationships ever felt right, why she'd constructed this elaborate excuse to have me in her home every day. If you're watching this and you believe in taking chances on love, even when it terrifies you, would you do me a favor? Hit that like button, and if this story is touching your heart, consider subscribing. Your support means everything, and it helps me continue sharing stories about love in all its beautiful, complicated forms. She told me she'd been afraid of what she was feeling, afraid of what it meant, afraid of disappointing the version of herself everyone expected her to be. But sitting there on her bedroom floor, our hands still intertwined, she said she was more afraid of never knowing what could happen if she stopped running from the truth. She leaned forward slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back, and when her lips met mine, the world reconfigured itself around us. It wasn't a dramatic movie kiss. It was tentative and tasting of salt from her tears, uncertain but full of possibility. It was the kiss of two people who'd been wandering, separate paths, suddenly discovering they'd been heading toward each other all along. What happened next wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything instantly became perfect. We had to navigate complicated conversations about what we wanted, what we were willing to risk, how we'd handle her family and her business, associates in a world that wasn't always kind to love that looked like ours. I stopped being her maid and started being her partner. Though we kept that quiet at first, testing the waters of this new reality we were creating together. There were moments of doubt, times when the old fears would resurface, days when she'd worry about her company's image, or I'd worry I wasn't enough for someone like her. But we kept choosing each other. She taught me that love wasn't about one person being above or below the other. It was about seeing each other clearly and deciding that what you saw was worth fighting for. I taught her that authenticity was more valuable than perfection, that being vulnerable was a kind of strength. We learned together that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is admit you want something different from what everyone expects, that you feel something that doesn't fit the script you thought you were supposed to follow. 6 months after that rainy Thursday, I moved into her apartment, not as an employee but as someone who belonged there. We turned her spare room into a shared office, where I finally started writing the novel I'd abandoned years ago, while she worked on making her company more inclusive and authentic. We danced to jazz records together, and she showed me her sketches, and we built a life that honored both of our truths. The gap that had once felt so wide between our worlds turned out to be an illusion, created by fear and assumption. Before we reach the end, I have a special request. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about love differently, or reminded you of your own journey, would you share your thoughts in the comments? Tell me about a time you took a risk for love or what this story meant to you. I read every comment, and your words inspire me more than you know. Looking back, I understand now that accepting that maid job wasn't about desperation or delusion. It was about a heart that knew what it wanted even when my mind couldn't justify it. About intuition that understood. Sometimes you have to get closer to someone before you can truly reach them. It was about being willing to show up even in uncomfortable ways, because the alternative, staying safely distant, was slowly killing something essential inside me. And perhaps most importantly, it taught me that love doesn't always announce itself with clarity and convenience. Sometimes it asks you to make choices that look foolish from the outside, to trust in something you can't yet see, to believe that vulnerability is the price of admission to something real. We're still writing our story, Elena and I, still figuring out what it means to love each other in a world that's learning to make space for all kinds of love. But we do it together now, without pretense, without hiding. Two people who found each other first as friends, then as something we didn't have words for, and finally as partners who chose truth over comfort and possibility over fear.